I've told this story maybe 4 times in my life. Once to my wife, once to my brother who didn't believe me, and twice to younger officers who needed to hear it more than I needed to tell it. I'm telling it again now because the woman in this story never would. She's not the type. She'd shrug and say it wasn't a big deal, that she just did her job. But I was in that room. I saw what happened. And some things you carry, whether you want to or not. So let me start at the beginning, or close to it. It was a Tuesday. I remember that part clearly, because Tuesdays at the base were supposed to be quiet. The briefing rooms half empty. The coffee burnt and free. Most of the senior staff didn't roll in until late morning on a Tuesday, and you could get actual work done before the place filled up with rank and noise. This was at a joint command facility. I won't say exactly where. Let's just say it was the kind of building that didn't have a sign out front, where you needed 3 badges to get past the lobby and a 4th to reach the floor where the real decisions got made. The air inside always smelled faintly of recycled cold air and floor wax. You stopped noticing it after a week. I was a lieutenant back then. Young. Cocky in the way that men are cocky when they've done a couple of hard things and haven't yet done the harder ones. I thought I understood the world pretty well. I thought I could read a room, read a person, size somebody up in about 10 seconds and be right most of the time. That Tuesday taught me I was wrong about all of it. The rain had started early. Not a storm, just that low gray drizzle that hangs over a coastline and makes everything feel slower. The kind of weather where the windows fog at the corners and the parking lot turns the color of wet concrete, which it already was, so it just got darker. People came in shaking water off their jackets. Somebody's umbrella had broken, and they were carrying the bent skeleton of it like roadkill. I was getting coffee in the corner of the main corridor when I first saw her. Now, I want to be honest about something, because the whole point of this is to be honest. When I first saw her, I didn't think much. She was maybe 40, average height, brown hair pulled back, a few gray strands she clearly hadn't bothered to hide. She wore a plain uniform with almost nothing on it, no flashy ribbons stacked up her chest, no obvious markers. She had a worn leather portfolio under one arm and a cup of tea, not coffee, in her other hand. She looked like she could have been anybody, an analyst, a contractor, somebody's admin who'd been around so long nobody questioned her badge anymore. She moved quietly. That's the thing I noticed, looking back, though at the time it didn't register. She didn't take up space. She didn't announce herself. She walked the way people walk when they've spent a lot of time in places where being loud could get someone killed. But I didn't know any of that yet. To me, on that Tuesday, she was just a woman in a plain uniform getting tea. She nodded at me as she passed, just a small nod, polite. I nodded back and didn't think about it again. The reason any of us were there that morning was a briefing. A big one, as it turned out, though they hadn't told the junior officers exactly how big. We just knew the room had been booked, the secure one, the one with the heavy door and the screens that took up an entire wall. We knew brass was coming in. We knew to wear the good uniform and keep our mouths shut unless spoken to. And we knew the SEALs would be there. There was a team rotating through, doing a workup before a deployment, and a few of them had been pulled into this briefing because it touched their area. Now, if you've never been around that particular community, let me explain something. There's a confidence those guys carry that fills a room before they even speak. It's not always arrogance, though sometimes it is. Mostly it's just the certainty of men who have been tested in ways most people never will be, and who came out the other side. They walk in, and the temperature of a room changes. The one at the center of this story, I'll call him Decker because that wasn't his name and he'd probably prefer it that way, was the loudest of them. Not loud like a fool, loud like a leader. Big through the shoulders, jaw like a shovel, the kind of guy who'd done 3 or 4 tours and had the easy, dangerous humor that comes with surviving them. Everybody liked Decker. Even when he was needling you, you liked him. He was the kind of man who made the room laugh, and he knew it, and he used it. I tell you all this so you understand what kind of person he was, Because the thing he did that morning, he didn't do it out of cruelty. I want that on the record. He wasn't a bad man. He was just a man who'd never been wrong about a room before, and he was about to be wrong in front of everybody. We filed into the war room around 9. It was colder in there than the rest of the building. They kept it that way for the equipment, I always assumed, but it had a side effect of making everyone sit up a little straighter, talk a little quieter. The big screen on the far wall was dark. The long table down the middle had little nameplates and bottled water at each seat. Around the edges of the room were the rest of us, the staff, the aides, the people who stood while the important ones sat. The admirals hadn't come in yet. That's important to the way this played out. The senior leadership was running late, held up somewhere, and so for about 15 minutes the room was just us. The mid-level officers, the SEALs, a scattering of analysts and support staff. And her. She'd come in quietly the way she did everything and taken a seat at the table, not at the head, off to one side in a chair that didn't have a nameplate that any of us could see. She set down her tea, opened her worn leather portfolio and started reading something. Didn't look up, didn't talk to anyone. A few people glanced at her. A woman, mid-40s, plain uniform, sitting at the big table like she belonged there, when none of the rest of us at her level would have dared. I saw a couple of officers exchange a look. The look that says, who's that and should we know her? Nobody asked. You learn in those buildings not to ask too many questions about people who clearly aren't going to answer them. Nobody except Decker. Decker had been holding court near the coffee station, telling some story to two of his teammates and a young staff officer who was laughing way too hard at all of it. I could hear pieces of it from across the room, something about a training exercise, somebody falling out of a helicopter into a swamp, the usual. Good story. Decker told it well. And then he turned, scanning the room the way those guys do, always counting exits, always reading faces. And his eyes landed on her. I watched it happen. I watched him take her in, the plain uniform, the tea, the quiet, the lack of obvious rank or ribbons, and I watched him make a decision. The wrong one. He grinned, that easy grin. And he walked over toward the table slow, his teammates trailing behind, sensing entertainment. "Ma'am," he said, and even the way he said ma'am had a little curl to it, a little wink. "You sure you're in the right room? This one's gonna get pretty serious." A couple of people chuckled, nervous chuckles, the kind you make when you're not sure if something's funny or if it's about to become a problem. She looked up from her portfolio, slowly, calm. She didn't look annoyed, she didn't look flustered. She looked at him the way you'd look at a dog that had started barking at a vacuum cleaner. Mild, a little patient. "I think I'm in the right room," she said. That was all, just that. And maybe if Decker had been a little smarter or a little less sure of himself, that would have been the end of it. The flatness in her voice should have been a warning. There's a kind of calm that loud people never recognize because they've never had to learn it. She had that calm. But Decker was rolling now. He had an audience he couldn't stop. "No, I'm just saying," he went on, leaning a hand on the back of an empty chair, grinning at his teammates playing to the room. "This is a pretty high-level thing. We got admirals coming in, operational stuff." He gestured vaguely at her tea, her plain sleeves. "So I gotta ask, and no offense, what's your rank? You here taking notes, or?" He let it hang there, or. The implication was clear. Or are you support staff? Or are you somebody's assistant? Or are you lost? And here's the thing. Here's the part I think about even now, years later. She didn't get angry. I've watched a lot of people get embarrassed in front of a room. I've watched the flush climb up a neck, watched the jaw tighten, watched somebody scramble to defend themselves and dig the hole deeper. I expected some version of that from her. It didn't come. She set down her pen. She closed the portfolio slowly, deliberately, like she was setting aside something fragile. And then she looked at Decker, really looked at him. The way I imagined she'd looked at a lot of things over the years that were a lot more dangerous than a seal with a big mouth, and she said, very quietly, "You really want to know my rank?" The room had gotten quiet by now. People had stopped pretending not to listen. The young staff officer who'd been laughing wasn't laughing anymore. He'd gone a little pale, actually, and I didn't understand why yet, but he did. He understood something the rest of us didn't. Decker spread his hands, still grinning but maybe just a hair less sure than before. "Yeah," he said, "sure, humor me." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked past him, toward the door. And that's when the door opened. I'll tell you what came through that door, and what happened in the 60 seconds after it, in part 2. But I want to leave you with this, because it's the thing I understood later and wish I'd understood sooner. The quietest person in the room is almost never quiet because they have nothing to say. They're quiet because they've already said the things that mattered, in places you'll never hear about, and they don't need you to know. Decker was about to find that out. So was I. The door opened. And I need you to picture this exactly, because the timing of it was almost cruel. The kind of timing you'd never write into a movie because nobody would believe it. But it happened. I was standing maybe 12 feet away, against the back wall, holding a coffee I'd stopped drinking, and I saw every second of it. The heavy door swung in, and the first man through it was an admiral. Not just any admiral, the senior man on the base. 3 stars on each shoulder, gray at the temples, a face you'd seen on briefing slides and in the newspaper. The kind of man who walked into rooms and rooms rearranged themselves around him. Behind him came 2 more flag officers, and behind them a cluster of aides and senior staff, all moving in that tight, fast knot that forms around real power. Everybody in the room snapped to attention, reflex. You don't think about it. 3 stars walks in, your spine straightens before your brain catches up. Chairs scraped. Conversations died. Decker, to his credit, came to attention too, still standing near her chair, still half grinning because the joke wasn't finished in his head yet. He thought there was still a punchline coming. There was, just not the one he expected. The Admiral took 2 steps into the room. His eyes swept across all of us, the standard sweep, the count, the assessment. And then his gaze stopped. It stopped on her. And the man's whole face changed. I've spent 20 years in uniform now. I have seen a lot of senior officers in a lot of situations. I have never, before or since, seen one do what that admiral did next. He stopped walking. The whole knot of people behind him nearly piled into his back. And this 3-star admiral, this man who outranked everyone in that room by a mile, who had aides scrambling to keep up with him, who didn't slow down for anybody, looked at the quiet woman with the tea and the plain uniform, and something crossed his face that I can only describe as recognition. And under the recognition, something I really didn't expect. Respect, the deep kind, the kind you can't fake and can't perform. "I didn't know you were here," he said. He said it quietly, almost gently, not the voice he'd use on the rest of us, a different voice entirely. She stood up, set down her tea, and she said I wasn't supposed to be. Plans changed. That was the whole exchange. But the room had gone so silent you could hear the air handlers humming in the walls. Now here is where it turned, and turned fast. The Admiral straightened. And then, and I will remember this until the day I die, he raised his hand and saluted her. 3 stars. Saluting a woman with no visible rank, in a plain uniform, holding a cup of tea. For a second nobody breathed. It didn't make sense. It violated every rule of the world we all lived in. You salute up. The junior salutes the senior. The whole architecture of military life is built on that one simple piece of plumbing, and we just watched the most senior man in the building point his hand at someone we'd all assumed was a nobody. And then the second admiral did it too. And the third. 3 flag officers, standing in a row, saluting her. I heard somebody behind me whisper, "Who is she?" and I realized it was my own voice. Decker. Oh, Decker. I wish I could have taken a photograph of his face in that moment, not to mock him, but because it was such a perfect record of a man realizing, in real time, that he had made a mistake of a size he could not yet measure. He was still standing right next to her chair. He'd asked her rank as a joke maybe 90 seconds earlier. "Humor me," he'd said. And now the entire flag-level leadership of the base was saluting the woman he'd just told might be in the wrong room. His grin was gone, just gone. His face had done that thing where the skin goes a little waxy and the eyes get very wide and very still. He hadn't moved. He couldn't seem to figure out what to do with his hands, his face, his entire body. The confidence that had filled the room when he walked in had drained out of him so completely that he looked, suddenly, like a much younger man. Like a kid who'd said something at the dinner table and only understood how bad it was once the whole table went silent. His two teammates had taken a small, instinctive step away from him. You know that move. When someone near you is about to take fire, you create a little distance. Plausible deniability. I wasn't with him. They were with him, but they were already pretending they weren't. The senior admiral lowered his salute. The other two followed. And then he turned his head slowly and looked at Decker. He'd heard it. Of course he'd heard it. He'd walked in right at the tail end. Maybe he hadn't caught every word, but he'd caught enough: the tone, the posture, the seal standing over the seated woman with that loose, mocking grin. The Admiral was not a stupid man. You don't get 3 stars by missing what's happening in a room. "Lieutenant," the Admiral said. He was looking at Decker. "Yes, sir." Decker's voice came out about an octave higher than it had been when he was telling the helicopter story. "You had a question for this officer." And there it was, this officer, confirming in 2 words the thing Decker now understood with sick certainty. She outranked him. By how much he didn't know yet, but by a lot, enough that 3 admirals had saluted her. Decker swallowed. I could see it from 12 feet away, the whole throat working. "No, sir," he said. I just—" "You asked her rank." The Admiral said it flatly, not cruel, just exact. "I heard that part." "Sir, I was—" Decker stopped. There was no good way to finish that sentence. "I was joking" sounded worse out loud than it did in his head. I didn't know admitted the whole problem. He just stood there, mouth slightly open, the silence stretching. And then she did something I didn't expect. She stepped in. "Sir," she said to the Admiral, "it's fine." He looked at her. "He didn't know who I was," she said. "Which is rather the point of it, isn't it? Nobody's supposed to." There was something in the way she said it. A dry, tired humor that told you she'd lived a whole life around this exact problem. Being underestimated. Being looked past. Being the quietest person in the room because the work she did couldn't be loud, would never be loud, was specifically designed so that men like Decker would look right through her and never see a thing. She wasn't enjoying his humiliation. That's what struck me. A lot of people handed that moment, the moment where the man who'd mocked you is publicly destroyed in front of 3 admirals, would have leaned into it, would have let him twist. God knows he'd earned a little twisting. She didn't. She reached out a hand and pulled him off the hook in front of everybody, when she had every right to leave him hanging. And somehow that made the whole thing land harder. The Admiral studied her for a moment. Then he gave a small nod, the kind that closes a subject, and the temperature of the room shifted again. "All right," he said. "Let's get started. We're already behind." And just like that, the machinery of the briefing began to grind back into motion. People found their seats. Aides shuffled papers. The big screen on the far wall flickered to life. But everything was different now. Everyone in that room had recalculated. Everyone was sneaking looks at the quiet woman with the tea, trying to figure out what she was. What she'd done. Why 3 flag officers had saluted her like she was the most important person in the building. Decker found a seat against the wall, the far wall, as far from her as the room allowed. He sat very still and very straight and stared at a spot on the table and did not say one more word for the rest of the briefing. I watched him do the thing we all do when we've embarrassed ourselves badly, replay it. You could see it running behind his eyes over and over. You sure you're in the right room? What's your rank? Humor me. Each loop a little worse than the last. I almost felt for him, almost. Here's what I didn't know yet, standing against that back wall with my cold coffee. I didn't know who she was. Not really. I'd learn pieces of it over the next hour and more of it over the next few years, and even now I don't know all of it, because most of what she did was the kind of thing that doesn't get written down where people like me can read it. But I knew enough in that moment to understand that I'd done the same thing Decker did, quieter, in my own head. An hour earlier I'd seen her in the corridor and filed her away as nobody. Analyst. Admin. Somebody's assistant. I'd been every bit as wrong as he was. The only difference between us was that I'd had the good sense to keep my mouth shut, and that's not the same thing as wisdom. That's just luck. The briefing started. The lights came down, and when the senior admiral introduced her to the room, when he finally said who she was and what she'd done, I felt the floor drop out from under every assumption I'd walked in with that morning. The lights came down. Not all the way. Just enough that the big screen on the wall became the brightest thing in the room, and our faces went soft and gray in the glow of it. The air handlers kept humming. Somebody coughed once and then went quiet, like even a cough felt rude now. The senior admiral stayed standing. The other two had taken their seats, but he stayed on his feet at the head of the table, and he waited until the shuffling stopped completely. He was good at that. He knew the value of silence. He let it sit until it was almost uncomfortable, and then he spoke. "Before we get into the material," he said, "I want to say something. Because some of you in this room don't know who's sitting at this table, and after what I just walked into, I think you should." I felt the whole room go still in a new way, not the attention stand-up stillness from before, a leaning in stillness. 40 people quietly deciding not to miss a word. He looked down the table at her. "With your permission," he said. She gave the smallest shrug, the kind that means if you must. She clearly didn't want this. She was the type who'd spent a career making sure rooms like this never knew her name, but she didn't stop him, maybe because of what Decker had done. Maybe she figured the room had earned an explanation. Maybe she was just too tired to argue with a 3-star. "Go ahead, sir," she said. "I'm going to tell you what he said as best I can remember it. I won't get every word right. It was years ago. But the shape of it I'll never lose, because it rearranged the way I understood the whole profession I'd given my life to." He didn't use her name. He never did the whole briefing. That told you something right there. "Some years ago," he started, "there was an operation. I won't give you the where or the when. Most of you wouldn't have clearance for it anyway, and the ones who do already know. What I'll tell you is that it went wrong. Badly wrong. The kind of wrong where good people don't come home." He let that sit. We had personnel on the ground in a place they shouldn't have had to be, cut off, with the situation collapsing around them by the hour. Communications were down. The plan we'd spent months building was on fire. And the people in the building that night, the people whose job it was to fix it, had run out of ideas. I know because I was one of them. I watched the SEALs at the table. They'd gone very still. The kind of stillness that men like that only get when they're hearing about their own world, the part of it that doesn't make the news. "There was one person," the Admiral went on, "who didn't run out of ideas, who looked at the same impossible board the rest of us were looking at and saw a move nobody else could see. And then, and this is the part, she didn't just see it. She took responsibility for it. She put her own name on a decision that, if it had gone wrong, would have ended her career and a great deal more. She made that call knowing exactly what it would cost her if she was wrong." He paused. "She wasn't wrong. Nobody moved. Because of what she did that night," the Admiral said, "people who were supposed to die came home. I'm not going to tell you how many. I'm not going to tell you their names. But I'll tell you that some of them are still serving today. Some of them have families now. Children who exist because of one decision one person was willing to make when everyone else, myself included, had frozen. He looked around the table. And here is the thing I need you to understand. She got no parade for it. There was no ceremony. There couldn't be. The whole operation was the kind of thing that never officially happened. She couldn't tell her family. She couldn't put it in a memoir. The medal she earned for it, if you can call it a medal, sits in a vault she's allowed to visit but not photograph. The world will never know what she did. That's the job she chose, quietly, without recognition, knowing it would always be that way. His voice dropped a little. So when I walk into a room and I see her sitting here, drinking her tea, not bothering anyone, and I see one of my officers standing over her asking her rank like it's a punchline, I'll be honest with you. It took everything I had not to come across this table. He didn't look at Decker when he said it. He didn't have to. I saw Decker across the room close his eyes for a half-second, like a man taking a blow he knew he deserved. "That salute," the Admiral said, and now he was talking to all of us. "The one you all just watched. I want you to understand what it was. It wasn't protocol. By the book, I had no obligation to render it. There are arguments about who outranks whom that we could have all afternoon." He shook his head slowly. "It wasn't about rank. It was about respect. There are people in this profession who have done things so far beyond what the rest of us have done that rank stops being the right way to measure them. You don't salute the insignia. You salute the person. And I will salute that person in any room on any day for the rest of my life, and I will not apologize for it to anyone." The silence in that room had weight, physical weight. You could feel it pressing on your chest. And she, the woman at the center of all of it, sat there with her hands folded on her closed portfolio, looking down at the table, her jaw tight. Not crying. She wasn't the crying type. I'd have bet my paycheck on it. But there was a wetness at the edge of her eyes that she was clearly furious at, and clearly losing the fight against, and she stared very hard at the table and breath slow and would not let it fall. Because here's what I understood, watching her face. This was the first time. In all those years of doing the most important work of any of our lives in total darkness, with nobody allowed to know, with no parade and no ceremony and a medal in a vault she couldn't photograph. This, right here, in a cold briefing room on a rainy Tuesday, was the first time anyone had said it out loud in front of other people. "Thank you, we see you. What you did mattered." She'd waited years to hear it, and she'd never asked for it once. The Admiral let the moment hold for exactly as long as it should, and not a second longer. He was too good a leader to milk it. He gave her dignity by moving on. "All right," he said, and his voice shifted back to business, brisk and dry. "Now you know why I asked her to be here. She has forgotten more about this than the rest of us will ever learn, and we'd be fools not to use it. Let's get to work." The screen changed. The briefing began for real. And I want to tell you, she was extraordinary in it. That's the part that's hard to capture if you weren't there. Once the work started, the quiet woman from the corridor was gone, and in her place was the sharpest mind in the room by a distance that wasn't even close. She didn't dominate. She didn't perform. She'd let other people talk, let them work their way down the wrong road, and then she'd ask one short question, just one, and you'd watch the whole room realize they'd been thinking about it backwards. She did this maybe 4 or 5 times over the next 2 hours. Quietly. No flourish. Just here's the thing you're all missing. And then she'd go back to her tea. The admirals deferred to her, not because they had to, because they'd learned, somewhere along the way, that it was the smart thing to do. And Decker. I kept stealing looks at him through the whole briefing. He sat against the far wall, and somewhere in that 2 hours, his face changed. The shock wore off. The embarrassment wore off. And what replaced it was something I recognized because I was feeling a quieter version of it myself. It was awe, and under the awe, shame, the useful kind, the kind that actually changes a person. He was watching her work. He was watching this woman he dismissed in 90 seconds take apart problems that the smartest people he knew couldn't crack, and he was understanding, the way you can only really understand a thing by watching it, exactly how badly he'd misjudged the situation. Not just her. The whole idea of how you measure a person. I'd find out later that something shifted in Decker that day, but that's getting ahead of myself. That's part 4 and part 5. For now, the briefing wound down. The screen went dark. The lights came up. And the part of the story I think about most, the part with Decker, and what he did when the room emptied out and what she said to him, that's still ahead. Because the salute wasn't the end of it. For Decker, it was the beginning. The briefing broke up the way they always do. Slowly, then all at once. The admirals left first. They had somewhere to be, those men always had somewhere to be, and they went out in the same tight knot they'd come in with, aides folding in behind them. The senior admiral stopped by her chair on his way out, said something low that I couldn't hear, put a hand briefly on her shoulder. She nodded. He left. Then the staff started packing up. Papers into folders, folders into bags, the quiet clatter of 40 people deciding the serious part of the day was over and they could be human again. The volume in the room crept back up. Somebody made a joke. Somebody laughed. The cold air didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. She didn't rush. She finished her tea, which had to have been stone cold by then, and she tucked her pen into the worn leather portfolio and zipped it closed, taking her time. She was in no hurry. People who have waited as long as she had to be seen don't tend to hurry out of the one room that finally saw them. I should have left. I had work. But I lingered against the back wall, pretending to check my phone because I didn't want to miss whatever happened next. And I could tell, watching across the room, that I wasn't the only one waiting. Decker hadn't moved either. He sat against the far wall while the room emptied, and you could see him working up to something. I knew the look. I'd worn it. It's the look of a man trying to decide whether to do the hard, correct thing or to slip out the door and let the moment die quietly and never have to face it. To his enormous credit, and I'll say this for him, because it's the truest good thing in this whole story, he chose the hard thing. When the room had thinned down to just a few stragglers, he stood up, straightened his uniform, and he walked the whole length of that war room, slow and deliberate, to where she was standing with her portfolio under her arm. I'll be honest, my stomach tightened watching him do it. There's a particular kind of courage in walking toward the person you humiliated yourself in front of, when every instinct in your body is screaming at you to walk the other way. He had it. Whatever else you want to say about Decker, the man had it. He stopped a respectful distance away, came to a loose version of attention, and he said, and I was close enough now to hear it, having drifted casually nearer like the eavesdropper I was, he said, "Ma'am, I owe you an apology." She looked at him, that same calm, patient look from before. She didn't make it easy for him, but she didn't make it hard either. She just waited. "What I said earlier," Decker went on, and his voice wasn't doing the higher octave thing anymore. He'd found the bottom of it again, steady now, was out of line. "I made a joke at your expense in front of this whole room. I didn't know who you were, and that's exactly the problem because it shouldn't matter who you are. I shouldn't have done it to anyone." He paused. "I've spent my career around people who think being the loudest guy in the room means something. I caught myself being one of them today, in front of you of all people." He shook his head, a small bitter movement aimed at himself. "I'm embarrassed, not because of who you turned out to be, because of who I turned out to be when I thought nobody important was watching." That last line landed on me too, who I turned out to be when I thought nobody important was watching. I've carried that line around for years. I've quoted it to young officers without telling them where it came from. She let the silence breathe for a second. Then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled, just a little, the first real one I'd seen from her all day. "You know what the funny thing is," she said. "Ma'am, you're the only person in this room who actually said anything to me. She tilted her head toward the door the rest of them had filed out through. 40 people. Every one of them looked at me sideways at some point today, trying to work out who I was while I was sitting at that table, wondering, judging some of them. You're the only one who had the nerve to come straight out and ask. A dry little breath of a laugh. You did it badly, but you did it. The rest of them just whispered. Decker didn't know what to do with that. You could see it. He'd come over expecting to be carved up or forgiven, one or the other, and instead she'd handed him something sideways and unexpected. I wouldn't recommend the approach, she added. The joke was a poor opening, but I'll take an honest question over a polite silence every day of the week. I've had a career full of polite silence, people deciding what I was without ever asking. It gets old. She shifted the portfolio under her arm. Let me give you something, she said. Free of charge since you came over here, which most people wouldn't have. You read me wrong today. Fine. Everyone reads me wrong. That's by design, and most days it's useful. But here's the lesson, and it's worth more than the apology you just gave me. She fixed him with that steady look. The most dangerous person in any room is almost never the loudest one. It's the quiet one in the corner that nobody's bothered to figure out. You're a SEAL. You of all people should know that. Half your job is being that person. Decker stood very still. You're right, he said quietly. We are. So act like you know it, she said, not unkindly, almost warmly actually, on both sides of it. The quiet one you overlook might be the one who saves your team someday, might be the one running the op that pulls you out of a hole. You'll never see them coming, and that's exactly the point. A beat. Don't make assumptions about the people you can't read. Make them earn your judgment. Or better, don't judge at all until they've shown you. It's cheaper than apologizing later. He nodded slowly, and then he did the thing. He came to attention, real attention this time, sharp, the way you do it when you mean it, and he saluted her. And she returned it. It was a completely different salute than the Admiral's. Theirs had been the salute of equals, of people who'd stood in the same dark rooms and knew what it cost. This one was a young man saluting someone he'd decided to learn from. A salute that said I was wrong, and I'm better for finding out. It was, honestly, the more moving of the two because it cost him more. The Admirals had nothing to lose by honoring her. Decker had just lost a great deal of his pride in front of 40 people, and he was choosing to render the salute anyway, with all of them watching. She held his eyes for a second after the hands came down. What's your name, Lieutenant? She asked. He told her, his real one. I'll remember it, she said. And the way she said it, you believed her. You believed that this woman, who forgot nothing, who'd carried the names of the saved and the lost in silence for years, would in fact remember the name of one loudmouth SEAL who'd had the decency to walk across a room and own his mistake. Thank you, ma'am, he said. Go on, she said. You've got a deployment to get ready for, and Lieutenant, he stopped. Come home, all of you. That's an order, even if I don't technically have the rank to give it. A small smile. Although, after this morning, I suspect you'll do what I say anyway. He actually laughed, a short, surprised, real laugh. Yes, ma'am, he said, and he left. I watched him go out the door, different man than the one who'd come in. Same shoulders, same jaw. But he walked out of that room carrying something he hadn't carried in. I don't have a better word for it than humility, and I know how soft that word sounds, but I watched it happen to a hard man in real time, so I'll use it. And then it was just her and me, and a couple of stragglers folding chairs. She caught me looking. I froze, caught. The eavesdropper exposed. I figured I was about to get a version of what Decker got, and I'd earned it, because I'd spent the morning silently filing her under nobody same as he had. I'd just been too much of a coward to say it out loud. But she didn't carve me up. She just looked at me, this young lieutenant pinned against the back wall, and she said one thing. And it's the thing I'll close on because it's the thing that stayed with me longest of all, and it's the reason I tell this story at all. So there I was, pinned against the back wall, caught staring. She walked toward me, unhurried like everything she did, and I stood up straighter, the way you do, bracing for whatever was coming. I figured I deserved a lecture. I'd been the silent version of Decker all morning, and she'd already proven she didn't miss a thing in a room. She stopped in front of me, looked at me for a second, and then she said, "You were going to file me away too, this morning in the corridor." It wasn't a question. My face must have answered for me, because she gave a small nod, like a doctor confirming a diagnosis she'd already made. "Don't look so guilty," she said. "Everyone does. It's not a character flaw. It's just lazy and you're young and you've got time to fix it." She paused. "Here's the only thing I'll tell you since you stuck around to listen, which is more than most do." I waited. "The whole job," she said. "The entire thing, all of it, it's not about being the one who gets saluted. I promise you it isn't. I went 20 years without a single one, and I'd have gone 20 more and not minded. The job is about being the kind of person who'd do the work even if no one ever found out, especially if no one ever found out. The salute is nothing. The salute is a nice morning. What matters is the years before it when there was no salute and you did it anyway." She tapped me once lightly on the arm. "Be that person," she said. "The rest takes care of itself." And then she walked out. Teacup in one hand, worn leather portfolio under her arm, plain uniform, gray strands in her hair, the most important person in the building, looking like nobody at all. I never saw her again. That's the truth. I never saw her again, not once in all the years since. I don't even know if she's still alive. People like her don't show up at reunions. They don't get write-ups when they retire. They just go quiet, the same way they were always quiet, and the world keeps turning and never knows what it owes them. But I want to tell you the last piece, the part about Decker, the part my brother didn't believe when I told him, and I don't entirely blame him because it sounds too clean to be real. But I've got no reason to lie to you, and I was there for the front of it and heard the rest from men I trust. That deployment Decker was getting ready for, it went bad. Not as bad as the operation the Admiral described, nothing's ever that bad, and lived to be talked about, but bad. His team got into a situation they shouldn't have been in, cut off, comms failing, the plan on fire. The kind of night good people don't always come home from. And the person on the other end of the line that night, in a dark room far away, working the impossible board, finding the move nobody else could see, making the call that pulled them out of the hole. I think you already know. I can't prove it was her, that's the honest part. These things don't get documented where men like me can read them, and I was a continent away by then, hearing it secondhand. But Decker believed it was. He told a couple of the guys afterward quietly that he'd recognized something in how it was handled. A particular kind of thinking. Backwards from how everyone else does it, he said. Saw the thing the rest of us were missing. He'd watched her do exactly that in the war room 4 or 5 times, and he never forgot the shape of it. He came home. All of them did that night. Same as the Admiral said, people who were supposed to die came home. Decker got to be one of the ones it happened to, instead of one of the ones it happened around. And the thing he said about it, the line that got back to me, the one I've never been able to shake. He said, "I asked her rank as a joke. Turns out her rank was the reason I'm standing here." I think about that war room a lot. The cold air, the burnt coffee, the rain on the windows, the quiet woman with her tea, sitting at a table where she didn't have a nameplate, reading something none of us were cleared to see, while a confident young man walked over to make her the punchline of his morning. And I think about how close I came to being him. How close all of us come, every day, to deciding someone is nobody because they're quiet, because they don't take up space, because they're not wearing their worth where we can see it. We are surrounded by people whose stories we will never know. The woman at the next desk, the man cleaning the floor at 2 in the morning, the quiet one in the corner of every room you'll ever walk into. Some of them have done things that would stop your heart if you knew, and they will never tell you. That's not a tragedy. For a lot of them, that's the whole point. The work was the reward. The silence was the price they paid gladly. The Admiral stood and saluted her that day, and it was a beautiful thing to see, and I'll never forget it. But the salute wasn't the lesson. This is the lesson, and it's the last thing I've got to say, and then I'm done telling this story for a while. The most important people you will ever meet will almost never look the part. They won't tell you what they've done. They won't ask for your respect. They'll just sit quietly in the corner with their cold tea, having already saved more lives than you'll ever know about. And the only thing they'll ask of you, if they ask anything at all, is that you don't decide who somebody is before they've had the chance to show you. So don't. Salute the quiet ones. You have no idea what they've carried.